Under the moonlight's glow, we see the heavenly demon palace of the heavenly demon cult. Inside the palace, a man, who appears to be the cult physician, stood before the heavenly demon cult heir. He bowed and apologized, explaining that the rare medicine they had worked on for months had not produced results. With a smile, the cult heir, our protagonist Lee, assured the physician that he had nothing to worry about. He knows that energy deviation isn't something that can be solved easily. Furthermore, he couldn't get angry at someone else when all of this was his fault to begin with. Feeling remorseful, he turned his attention to the bed beside him and looked on at the silhouette of a bedridden man. He thought to himself that this could have been avoided if he wasn't a half-assed pupil. He narrates that he was born with a broken lower core and a body that can't hold internal chi. With all of his shortcomings, he decided to pour all of his efforts into learning mystic arts. It paid off. He was able to rise to the position of cult heir in the heavenly demon cult. He did all of this to pay tribute to his master, but things weren't panning out like he expected. As he prepared to leave, he turned to the physician and thanked him for his work, and then he stepped into the hallways, lost in thought. The prized medicine of Hebe that the physician worked so hard on was useless, and he pondered if there was any medicine in the world that could cure his master's energy deviation. As he walked, a voice called out, greeting him. This person, the vice cult leader, asked Lee if he had been well in his absence. Lee was taken aback. It's been a long time since the vice cult leader went on a journey to tour their lands, and he comments that he wasn't expecting that he would be back so soon. The vice cult leader explained that he was forced to come back sooner than anticipated because the cult leader and the cult heir were both unable to carry out their current duties. As the vice cult leader, it was his obligation to get things done so the heavenly demon cult could prosper. Lee walked past him exclaiming that he understood, and in a cold tone, he thanked the vice cult leader for his efforts. Later that night, inside his chambers, Lee sat alone drinking tea. As he took a sip of the tea the servants made for him, he reflected on his earlier interaction with the vice cult leader. He had a feeling that the vice cult leader, Chun Hajin, didn't just take the trip to tour their lands. After taking a sip of the tea, he instantly knew something was wrong. He started chuckling, exclaiming that he didn't expect them to come after him in his chambers. He crushed the teacup in his hand, and as he coughed up blood, he grinned and commented that this must be the reason why the servant insisted he try the new tea. He gave his regards, saying the tea was to die for. He felt bad drinking on his own, so he asked the figures, who were lurking in the shadows above him, if they wanted to have a drink with him. The assassins suddenly declared their intentions to attack him, and Lee asked them if giving him delicious tea was justification to attack him in his chambers. The assassins dropped from above and stabbed Lee in multiple directions, however he suddenly disappeared. They recognized that he used illusion arts, but they couldn't tell when he activated the technique. They started looking for traces of him, and Lee suddenly appeared behind them. He warned them that if they wanted to kill him, then they should have made more preparations. The assassins jumped at him, and Lee lifted his arm, reminding them of his warning. Lee had enough. He clenched his fist and his body started emitting a purple aura. With an intimidating expression, he shouted, "You small fries will never be enough to kill me." Chains suddenly manifested around his body and shot out in multiple directions, piercing through the assassins. As the corpses of the assassins dropped to the ground, multiple figures appeared behind him. He sensed their kai, and with his back still facing them, he asked if this was all they had. He felt like it would be a waste if this was all they had planned after setting such a grand stage. He faced them, and with a grin, he asked Chun Hajin and the other elders if their ancestors, who remained loyal to the heavenly demon cult till their death, would be proud of what they were doing. Hajin and the other elders started sweating nervously. The poison that they used, Crane's red beak, is said to melt an entire ox with a single pinch. However, this monster is still able to laugh and make jokes after drinking an entire cup of it. Lee continued, exclaiming that if his body was in a better condition then he would have been sure to leave a hole in all their heads, and Hajin responded by sharing his sympathies. Hajin thought to himself, without a doubt Lee was impressive, but there's no way he would sit idly and let some orphan, who can't even learn martial arts, be the next cult leader. He felt confident in what he was doing because he had powerful forces backing him. He gave the other elders a look, and they all suddenly unsheathed their weapons and jumped at Lee, surrounding him. Lee asked when the elders became such cowards, and if they were really going to attack a brat like him together after feeding him poison. Hajin pointed his finger at Lee. "Just keep talking, you bastard," he shouted. He tried saying that this wouldn't be happening if Lee fulfilled his duties as cult heir, but Lee interrupted, asking him to cut the bullshit. In a cold tone, he asked Hajin to reveal the true mastermind behind this. Hajin was in shock. He seemed to want to say something but was rendered speechless. He quickly snapped himself out of shock, and he tried defending himself, saying this decision was made by him and the elders. But Lee pointed out that Hajin lacks the gut to plan something like this. Hajin has always been filled with ambition, but Lee found it strange that he only decided to make a move now. Lee asked if Hajin was being supported by the Master of Black Spirits and Skull, or perhaps the Master of Thunder and Lightning. There is also a possibility that it could be the master of gathering demons. As he listed names, Lee concluded that he must be receiving orders from outside the heavenly demon cult. With a cold expression, he accused Hajin and the elders of selling out the cult and plotting with heretics to kill him. He started wondering if his master ended up in his current condition because of Hajin as well. Infuriated that Lee would dare suggest that he betrayed the heavenly demon, Hajin released his internal energy and used a technique that transformed his hand into the claw of a dragon. Then he charged at Lee. As Hajin's hand got closer, Lee, remaining calm, concluded that he had guessed right earlier because of Hajin's response. He reflected, thinking to himself that this is the cost of trusting someone his master warned him about. Hajin grabbed him by the neck and slammed him into the wall. He declared that he hates Lee's personality, but since they trained under the same master and Lee is still the acting leader of the heavenly demon cult, he will end things with his own hands as a sign of respect. Lee found all this comical. He asked why Hajin was trying to keep up his facade when he planned all of this, and he insulted him, saying his cowardice is the reason he ended up as a puppet for the outer forces. This angered Hajin. He shouted, "You must be looking for a painful death." He quickly calmed himself, then he assured Lee that he would correct him and the cult leader's mistakes and make sure the heavenly demon cult prospers. Lee started chuckling, which quickly turned into a burst of uncontrollable laughter. His laugh echoed through his chamber, sending a shiver down the elder's spine. Lee remarked that Hajin has endured being underneath him for so long, but he still doesn't know what type of person he is. He continued, saying that if Hajin wanted to kill him, then he should have remembered one small detail. Hajin asked him if these were his final words, but as he spoke he noticed Lee reaching into his garments and pulling out a weapon. Hajin quickly recognized the weapon. It was the demon dragon sword. He reached for the sword, asking if Lee thought he would let him pull off such an obvious trick. The gem on the sword suddenly started glowing purple, and the energy being released from the sword blew Hajin back. Hajin looked on with a horrified expression on his face. He nervously asked when Lee had time to gather this much mystic power. Lee explained that he poured all his mystic power into the demon dragon sword, which contains the will of the first heavenly demon. Furthermore, he was able to gather all the energy needed while defending against the elders' laughable attacks. The elders scurried around trying to get into defensive formation and combine their inner Kai to defend against Lee's attack. Lee's voice echoed throughout the room, declaring that they were too late. The sword was already overflowing with mystic power, and Lee activated the technique, shouting soul-combusting hell flame. Everything turned black and white, and the panel pans out, showing Lee's chamber exploding. Afterwards, Lee sat in the aftermath of the explosion, on the brink of death. In his final moments, he laments that no matter how pitiful of a life he lived, he didn't expect it to end like this. The snow falling around him brought on a memory of being bullied as a child. In a flashback, we see him getting beaten by 3 children who appear to be around his age. After beating him till they were satisfied, the bullies decided to stop. As they walked away, they warned him not to go around saying he could see evil spirits again, and threatened to make his life miserable if he did. As they walked away, one of them remarked that he heard Lee's lower core was broken. Another one cruelly declared that if he was an orphan born with a broken lower core, he would have killed himself long ago. Lee gathered his strength, and as he stood from the ground he stared intently at the rock in front of him. He simply told others what he could see, and they bullied him for it. The words of the bullies caused him to snap. He could no longer endure such a shitty world, so he picked up the rock and leaped at the bullies. He hit one of them in the head and ran away. The bullies chased after him, and a short while later we see him hiding out underneath a cliff. He looked up, turning his attention to the evil spirits, remarking that they didn't know when to give up. He asked them to leave him alone. Suddenly a voice called out to him, commenting that he had special eyes. Lee was shocked. He stumbled backward, his heart racing as he thought to himself, pondering how this person had managed to sneak up on him. As he observed the stranger, he noticed the expensive clothes and the sheathed sword that looked even more expensive. This place is far from the forest path, so he guessed that the stranger must be looking for him. He remarked that the stranger must be interested in his eyes, and he gave him permission to take it. The stranger was surprised. Curious, he asked Lee why he was surrendering without a fight. Lee sat with his legs crossed, and he lowered his head and pointed out that the stranger looks like a master of martial arts, so resisting would do him no good. Furthermore, he has been on the other end of hatred and disrespect from the moment he was born because of his eyes, and at this point he didn't mind living the rest of his life blind. He wasn't sure if the stranger was after his eyes because they can be used for some kind of medicine, but he gave him permission to pluck his eyes out and do whatever he wanted with them. He asked the stranger to get it over with quickly. The man took off his coat and suddenly wrapped it around Lee. He assured him that his eyes weren't a curse, but a blessing. He told Lee that some people are born with a blessed upper energy core or with a special streak in their soul, and those people always end up doing great things. Furthermore, he was certain that Lee had the potential to become someone special in the world. Those words felt so sweet to hear, and even though they sounded like lies, they felt warm. The man asked Lee to follow him, and without hesitating Lee accepted. As they walked off into the distance, the man asked Lee if he had a name, and Lee replied saying he didn't. So to commemorate the moment they met, the man decided to give him a name. On that day, Lee gained a reason to keep on living, and he narrates that he did whatever he could to help out his master. But because of his body, his master fell into a state of energy deviation. He gritted his teeth in frustration, accepting death here when he hasn't cured his master would be too pitiful. However, his body was about to turn to dust, and he knew that no matter what, his body wouldn't last any longer. There was only one way to save himself. He struck the ground and released his mystic power. The area around him was illuminated by a golden light as he activated a technique. Lee was planning to use the forbidden art of Zoroastrianism, the primordial divine wheel of reincarnation. This forbidden art was used by ancient practitioners of Zoroastrianism to overcome death by transferring their souls into another person's body. But this technique wasn't used often because even if the transfer is successful, that person is destined to live a short life because the new body will reject the new soul. Lee circulated the remaining mystic energy in the fragments of the demon dragon sword to activate the forbidden technique, but he didn't have enough energy. He went through with the technique anyway, leaving it up to the heavens. As the technique activated, Lee turned his gaze to the heavenly demon palace, praying that his master would be safe until he returned. Suddenly, a pillar of light shone down from the heavens and Lee lost consciousness. A short while later, as he was gaining consciousness, he heard a voice asking him if he understood his role for when the clan head visits. Lee's head was hurting, and the voice ringing in his ear annoyed him. The voice continued, explaining that as the son of a concubine, he should keep laying low so he doesn't embarrass the clan. Lee opened his eyes, noticing the terrible condition his body was in, and the shabby clothes he was wearing. His entire body was numb, and he felt a tingling sensation. But worst of all was the sound of this person screaming in his ear. Then his eyes widened as he suddenly realized that the primordial divine wheel reincarnation had succeeded. The person who had been screaming at him was at her limit. She shouted his name, and Lee looked up at her. After getting his attention, she crossed her arms with a beating stick in hand, and she asked if Lee was listening and if he intended to lay on the floor while speaking to her. He stood from the ground, holding the side of his stomach. This person screaming at him called him by the same name he had in his previous life. He thought that the whole situation was ironic. This person, annoyed by the fact that she has been emphasizing what he should do when the clan head visits for a while now, and yet Lee wasn't responding, lifted her beating stick in the air, and as she struck him, she shouted, "You should respond to an adult when they are speaking to you." Before the beating stick could strike him, Lee grabbed her arm, insulting her, saying she is an old hag with bad breath. He asked her to turn her face the other way while she was screaming at him. This person quickly retracted the beating stick in shock. As sweat dripped nervously down her face, she asked Lee if he was refusing her rightful teaching, and if he really just called her an old hag. Before Lee could answer, she stormed out of the room, saying Lee shouldn't even dream about exiting his room until he understood his mistake. After she left, Lee sat on the bed, feeling a sense of calm and peace. The peace and quiet allowed him to finally gather his thoughts. According to the remaining essence of this body, that person is his new stepmother. The primordial divine wheel of reincarnation only works on bodies that have just died or that are on the verge of death. From the condition of his body, he guessed that the previous owner of this body was left on the brink of death by that person beating him. He thought to himself, questioning how someone can be so cruel as to beat a child to the brink of death, even if the child is not your real son. He thought his old life was pitiful, but comparing this to his previous life made it seem like he was blessed. As he lay there, he started observing his body. He checked his shoulder, narrating that this body was in bad health and had barely been trained. He guessed that that's probably why the previous owner died. However, he opened up his robe, exclaiming that this body had something he lacked in his previous life, a lower energy core. If he could train his lower core to learn martial arts on top of the mystic arts he learned using his upper core in his previous life, and the power of his eyes to control the dead, then he would be unstoppable. Lee looked at his hand with a determined expression. Getting stronger was a necessity because only then would he be able to protect his master. With newfound motivation, he looked up with a determined look in his eyes. He clenched his fist, exclaiming that he would show the bastards who betrayed him and dared to interfere with the heavenly demon cult that they messed with the wrong person. From the remaining essence, he also learned about the Sichuan Tang clan, one of Murum's 6 great clans and the ruler of Sichuan Murum. To the west of Sichuan, there is Tibet where the Potala Palace is, and Qinghai where the Kunlun sect is. To the south of Sichuan are the Heavenly Dragon Temple, Jiankang sect, and the 5 Poisons sect. Lastly, to the north of Sichuan is the front lines of the Central Plains Murum that opposes the Heavenly Demon Divine cult. The Tang clan vanguard is led by 3 groups, and one of those groups is the Tempest Squad. The leader of the Tempest Squad, who's also known as the Tempest Swordsman, is Tang Hasim, and with his fame and recognition from the Tempest Squad, he founded a branch of the Tang clan, known as the Nine Dragons Division. The Tang Patriarch, Dark Supreme Tang Moonhyuk, had entrusted the division to Tang Hossan, whom he had deep faith in. Tang Hossan proceeded to have 3 heirs. 2 were children he had with Namgung Sanyang, his legal wife, and the woman who was shouting at Lee earlier. The first child was Tang Kyujin, and her brother Tang Yucheng was the 3rd child. Comparatively, his second child was born as a result of Tang Hossan sleeping with one of his servants, a mistake he made while drunk, and Lee reincarnated as the illegitimate child of this clan. With his eyes closed, Lee tried to visualize his next moves. However, a voice suddenly shouted at him in a questioning tone, asking how he could treat the matriarch in that manner. Annoyed, Lee tried to ignore this person. However, they continued, demanding that he go and apologize to Namgung right now. He opened his eyes, noticing the servant in front of him. The servant explained that the madam, Namgung, said not to bring in any food to the White Pavilion. He continued his rant, saying because of Lee's stupid actions the servants in the White Pavilion, along with himself, would have to starve. Lee was shocked by the treatment he was receiving from the servants. He is indeed an illegitimate child, but he is still the son of the branch family patriarch, which makes him an heir candidate. He couldn't believe that the previous owner of this body was so much of a pushover that even the servants were looking down on him. The servant demanded that he go and beg the madam for forgiveness, since it was highly likely that she would allow food to be brought into the White Pavilion after punishing Lee for his disrespect. But before he could finish, Lee slapped him across the face. The servant was sent stumbling backward. Agitated, the servant looked up at him and asked him why he slapped him when he was kind enough to give him advice. He exclaimed that if Lee continued to act like this, he won't help him in the future. Lee remained silent. He just approached him with a looming aura, and the hand he just slapped the servant with was still raised. Before Lee slapped him, the servant reminded Lee that he would get into serious trouble if he hit him. However, Lee ignored him and slapped him again. The servant then threatened to report this to the madam, but Lee just slapped him again. He continued this until the servant apologized. A short while later, after disciplining the servant, Lee says that he trusts that from now on the servant, Hyungsum, will do the right thing since he and his mother are hometown friends. With his face disfigured, Hyungsum struggled to talk, but he was able to mutter that he understood and that he would never forget the kindness Lee and the second madam had shown him. Furthermore, from now on he will work even harder to serve Lee. Lee brought his face closer to Hyungsum's face, and with a terrifying grin, he asked him if that meant he would get what he requested earlier. With tears streaming down his face, Hyungsum says he will leave immediately to get what Lee requested. He bowed his head, stating that he would be right back. Hyungsum ran out of the room, and after he left, Lee turned his attention to his trembling hand. When he was disciplining Hyungsum, he acted fine because at this moment he needs to show the servant that their previous action is no longer acceptable. However, his hand was stinging just from hitting Hyungsum a few times. He thought to himself, wondering how someone could be so weak. Not only is his body weak, but he also has no allies within the Tang clan. He guessed that the previous owner of this body was probably in this position because of Namgung, and this raised some problems for him. Going forward, it will be difficult for him to move around within the Tang clan. He tapped his stomach, narrating that for now, all he can do is accumulate inner energy, and then show what he is capable of when the opportunity arises. But there was a problem with that as well. This body has Tang clan energy inside it. But since his previous master, the heavenly demon, uses demonic arts, he can't use it with the cultivation techniques of an orthodox faction. However, he was certain that there must be many cultists within the heavenly demon divine cult who came from the Tang clan, and whose ancestors were able to live on for 1,000 years while using demonic arts. Since his body was untrained in martial arts, he closed his eyes, bracing himself for the large amount of strain that what he was about to do would place on his upper meridian. Using the innate memories stored in his upper dantian, Lee replicated the information in his memories to the area around him to create a virtual space. He released some energy, and a white ring appeared above his head. Then the imaginary space of the heavenly demon archive manifested. Lee glanced around the archive, feeling thankful. It seemed that not much had been lost after the primordial divine wheel of reincarnation, and shortly after he found one of the techniques that was perfect to learn for his current situation. This technique was the poison dragon essence art. He narrates that a poison specialist of the Tang clan was exiled and ended up joining the heavenly demon cult. That specialist then created the poison dragon essence art. As he read through the teaching in the book, Lee learned that the specialist replaced the demonic kai used in demonic arts with poison kai. That is why he could learn the cult's martial arts despite his body's familiarity with the Tang clan's techniques. He closed the book and continued. The Sichuan Tang clan joined the Orthodox faction in opposition to the heavenly demon cult, but they were a rarity amongst the Orthodox sect since they used poison kai. Lee hoped that if he used the poison dragon essence art to learn demonic arts, then members of the Tang clan wouldn't be suspicious of him. He sat down on his bed. Going forward, if he wanted to gather poison kai, then he needed to endure horrendous pain and intake a lot of high-quality poisons to replenish his poison kai. Li looked up, his eyes giving off a purplish glow. It seems by using his upper dantian, his eyes had reawakened the ability to see the dead. The expression on his face started shifting to a grin. He spoke, asking if they were just going to stand there and stare at him. The view of the panel shifted across the room, and shadowy figures started materializing. Li teased the shadowy figures, saying he is aware of his handsome face, but even someone like him will get embarrassed if they continue to stare at him so intensely. He greeted the figures, saying good day elders, and the figures took form. The figures resembled Chun and the elders who betrayed him. Chun shouted, asking if Li had finally lost his mind. He asked him how he could reduce someone like himself to this state. The elders grabbed the chains around their necks and demanded that Li remove the chains. They asked him if he didn't fear their vengeance. Li sat in a luxurious manner with his head resting on his left hand. He looked on smugly and teased them, saying he was glad to see that they were all so happy to see him. This infuriated the elders. They shouted, accusing him of having the same filthy personality even though he reincarnated. They explained that his shitty personality is one of the reasons so many of them decided to revolt. Li grabbed hold of Chun's chain, exclaiming that they should have been prepared for this if they were planning on killing him. Chun fell face first into the ground, and Li stood towering over him. His energy was overflowing, and it took the shape of the Ghost King. Chun looked on with sweat dripping nervously down his face. He thought to himself, wondering if Li's mystic powers had always been this strong. Li explained that if they remain a ghost, then they won't be able to rejoin the cycle of reincarnation and attain Samara. He asked Chun if he doesn't want to be reincarnated. Chun struck the ground, cursing his fate, and then he shouted, saying he had information. He tries to leverage the information that he has so Li would allow him to be reincarnated. However, Li interrupts, saying he doesn't need the information he has. This shocked Chun. He looked on, questioning how that was possible. Li explained that he doesn't need him specifically since he has others who can give him information. He reached forth his hand, and using his powers, he transformed Chun into a ghost pill. He showed the ghost pill to the other elders, explaining that it's filled with Chun's resentment and hatred of the dead, so much so that it's more toxic than most poisons. He ate the ghost pill, exclaiming that Hajin will now become his new body's nutrition. As the sound of him chewing the pill echoed through the room, the elders looked on with horrified expressions on their faces. After swallowing the ghost pill, Li's energy was overflowing, and as his body adjusted to the toxicity, the elders wondered how he was still standing. One of the elders reminded the others that Li was able to raise hell in their previous life even after they fed him Crane's red beak. Li turned his attention to the elders, his body emitting a purple aura, and with a devious grin he told them that now that Chun had become the foundation of his poison dragon essence art, they had a choice to make. He asked if they will talk obediently or if they will choose to be devoured by him. Sometime later, Li turned the elders who chose to be devoured into ghost pills, and he learned from the others who decided to talk obediently that the elders of the heavenly demon cult were just following the orders of an organization with no real name, but some refer to them as the Society. The elders pleaded to him, asking him to spare them. They explained nervously that they told him everything that they knew. This left Li deep in thought. He thought to himself, wondering why a no-name organization was plotting against the heavenly demon cult. One of the elders spoke up with a horrified expression on his face, explaining that they had no choice because the ones behind Li's murder were able to do things that they had never seen before. He begged Li to believe that they really had no choice. Li continued thinking. He narrates that the heavenly demon cult is an evil cult that believes that their clan head is a god incarnate, and these elders who revere the heavenly demon as their god plotted to eliminate him because he was ruining their god's reputation by being the cult heir. It also seemed like the elders feared the members of the society more than their master, who they worshipped. Li thought the elders had simply fallen for the schemes of the orthodox or unorthodox factions, but it seems something bigger was at play. As he sat there, a name suddenly came to mind: Divergence. He narrates that the Divergence were humans who transcended while attempting to climb the tower standing above the skies. They were absolutes or demi-immortal beings who could be considered natural disasters. He drew connections which led him to conclude that the Divergence were behind this. The ones behind the elders' actions far exceeded his expectations. Li thought he would have time to sit back and let his new body slowly adapt to the poison. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Feeling a sense of urgency, he swallowed the ghost pills, and afterward, he gritted his teeth, saying he has to speed things up. 2 months later, inside the matriarch's room, shouting was heard from outside. Inside the room, Namgung hurled her teacup against the wall in a fit of rage, and she asked Hyungsum if he has been giving Li food. Hyungsum assured her that he along with the other servants would never go against her orders. But this only frustrated Namgung further. She shouted, questioning how Li was still alive after 2 months if the servants weren't giving him food. Her plan to have Li crawl back to her begging for forgiveness has been ruined. Furthermore, there is a rumor going around saying she is trying to kill him. She held her forehead, wondering how she will face the patriarch. who will be visiting soon. She asked Hyungsum to tell her about what Lee asked him to fetch, and Hyungsum reported that Lee wanted information on the current political situation of the Jonghu, in particular, information on the unorthodox and demonic factions. Lee requesting this type of information was concerning to the madam. 1. Lee never showed interest in those things before, and all the reports she has been receiving from Hyungsum made it clear that Lee's personality made a drastic change in the past 2 months. A thought suddenly came to mind. She wondered if someone was supporting Lee. Although it's clear that Lee is useless, he is still the son of the branch clan patriarch, so if he makes a good impression during the patriarch's visit and piques his interest, then he will be able to land himself a comfortable position in the clan. It wouldn't be strange if there were tons of people that wanted to swarm around Lee with a dark goal for the clan in mind. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense that someone was behind the recent change in Lee's personality. She suddenly erupted with rage, striking her table, and shouting that all that attention Lee was receiving belonged to her kids Kyujin and Yucheng. She cursed Lee for trying to take away what rightfully belonged to her children. Fear struck Hyungsum, and he quickly struck the ground with his face, hoping to avoid Namgung's fury. A servant, who was standing guard outside, intruded, reporting that the young master Yucheng was here to see her. Namgung's mood suddenly shifted, and with a cheerful attitude, she exclaimed that it seemed her son has already completed his isolation training. Using this opportunity, Hyungsum tried to leave. He asked Namgung if he could take his leave, and Namgung, who was excited to see her son, dismissed him quickly. However, before he left, she asked him to report back to her if he spotted anything strange about Lee. Yucheng entered the room with his hands together, and he greeted his mother, asking if she had been well. With a smile, Namgung exclaimed that she had been well, and she asked Yucheng to tell her about his training. Yucheng patted his chest, and with a confident smile he told Namgung that while he still had a long way to go, he was able to get closer to mastering hidden weapons. Namgung praised him, and Yucheng's expression quickly shifted from the confident smile he had earlier to a more serious one. He heard about how Lee was being disrespectful to his mother. Namgung let out a sigh, and she told Yucheng that Lee's personality suddenly changed and that lately, he had been causing her a lot of headaches. From the information he received, Yucheng didn't think Lee's sudden shift in personality made any sense, and he told his mother that after thinking about it he concluded that someone was supporting him. Namgung was taken aback, as she had also come to the same conclusion. Yucheng continued, reminding Namgung that Lee doesn't have much inner energy, and since he hasn't been eating or drinking in the past 2 months, he should have died. He added that the only way someone like Lee could survive being locked up for 2 months without food or water is if he was receiving support from someone. He was certain that someone is feeding Lee elixirs in secret every night. Namgung clenched her fist in frustration. She was thinking the same thing as Yucheng. However, no one who would be stupid enough to support a bastard child came to mind. Yucheng recommended they let Lee join them during the patriarch's visit. Confused, Namgung questioned why, and Yucheng explained with an evil grin that if they set up a grand stage, then the person behind Lee would be forced to make a move. Namgung thought about it for a moment, and she agreed with Yucheng. She speculated that since the person behind Lee had been feeding him elixirs for the past 2 months, Lee must have grown decently strong, so if they forced him to participate when the patriarch visits, and he does well, the person behind him will appear to take the credit. Although she liked the plan, Namgung was concerned that Lee would cause some trouble because of how they had treated him, so she asked Yucheng if they wouldn't get in trouble if Lee decided to act up. Yucheng pointed out that Lee is still a bastard child despite his supporters. With an arrogant smile, he assured his mother that if Lee acted up, then he would step in as the little brother and stop him. No matter how many elixirs Lee's new supporters fed him, Yucheng was certain that someone who only learned the Tang clan energy arts, a martial art that even low-ranking servants can learn, wouldn't be able to lay a finger on him. The scene then shifts to outside Lee's building, where we see poison mist escaping from the window. Lee was meditating, absorbing the poison from the poison dragon essence art. Afterward, a large amount of energy was released from his body and it took the shape of a dragon. The next day, Lee went over all the information he had been able to gather. 2 months ago he asked Hyungsum to bring him information on the recent history of Jonghu. Hyungsum returned to his home a short while later, reporting that he heard that the demonic cult had been undergoing a civil war for the past 6 years. Lee was taken aback. He thought a lot of time had passed since he used the primordial divine wheel of reincarnation, but that doesn't seem to be the case. To his dread, only 6 years have passed since his death. Hyungsum added that the heavenly demon cult leader also went missing 6 years ago. This confused Lee and he asked Hyungsum for more information. Hyungsum explained that the heavenly demon used a wicked trick and disappeared. Because of his disappearance, the heavenly demon cult was left in chaos since no one knew when he would return. This new information left Lee with a sense of hope, and in the present, he narrates as he trained that he wants to rush to Tianjin immediately, but he lacks the power and the information to do so. He moved through his footwork techniques with a sense of urgency. He was certain that the ones who betrayed the clan were using all kinds of methods they could to find his master. But if they hadn't been able to find him in the past 6 years, it means he still has some time. But right now he lacks information. He needs information rivaling that of the traitors, and there's also the matter of the Tang Patriarch visiting. The Sichuan Tang Patriarch, the Dark Supreme Tang Moonhyuk, is one of the top 10 masters of the world, and there is a rumor going around that Moonhyuk is planning to establish a special security division. Lee narrates that if he joins that division, then he can utilize the Tang clan's network, increasing his chance of finding his master. After going through the footwork techniques, a spider on the table praised him, saying it seemed like he was on the verge of completing the 12th beat of the Violent Tiger. The 12 beats of the Violent Tiger is an advanced basic technique that is taught among vagabonds. It's a martial art that utilizes the body. Lee stared at his hand and clenched his fist. If he could strengthen his body by pushing it to the limit using extreme muscle training, then he wouldn't have a hard time using the Venom Dragon cultivation technique. He added that he can also consume more ghost pills and purify his blood and veins. He turned to the spider on the table beside him, asking if he only brought the Bigu pill again. The spider apologized, saying he did, and that there wasn't much he could do because of the harsh security. Lee reminded the elder inside the spider's body that he was working on spare time, and that if he doesn't work properly, then he always has the option to turn him into a ghost pill. This sent a shiver down the spider's abdomen, and he assured Lee that he was doing his best. Lee decided to trust him for now, and he shifted the conversation, asking if the spider was able to gather information. Specifically, he wanted to know if there was any new information about the Dark Supreme. The spider told him that he didn't hear anything new about the Dark Supreme visiting. However, he reported to Lee that Yucheng finished his seclusion training. Lee took a moment, thinking about what the spider just said, and eating the remaining Bigu pills. Afterwards, he comments that it makes sense for Yucheng to stop his seclusion training since the Dark Supreme was visiting soon. The spider's expression suddenly shifted to a more serious one, and he informed Lee that Yucheng and Namgung had a secret meeting about him. This got Lee's attention, and he asked the spider to tell him what he overheard. The spider reported everything to Lee, and a short while later, we see Lee asking the spider if Namgung and Yucheng really believe that he has someone supporting him. The spider confirmed it, saying their whole meeting was trying to figure out what to do about his supporters. Lee chuckled to himself and exclaimed that Yucheng and Namgung are very creative and that they should start writing novels. But he was glad because they decided to recommend him to the security division. Getting into the security division has been on his mind recently, and now that path has been opened for him. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. On the other side of the door, Hyungsum announced that it was him and that he was here to give Lee something. Lee told him to enter, and Hyungsum entered the room and showed Lee a tray with a bowl of stew. Confused, Lee asked what it was, and Hyungsum told him that Namgung asked him to give him the stew. This confused Lee, and he reminded Hyungsum that the lady previously told all the servants not to give him any food. Hyungsum explained that Namgung said that Lee should have finished reflecting, and since he has already suffered so much, she is giving him the stew, which was mixed with special elixirs to help him replenish his energy. Namgung's obvious ploy irritated Lee. He took a moment to calm himself, and he asked Hyungsum to leave the stew. However, Hyungsum told him that Namgung asked him to watch Lee drink the stew. Lee quickly snatched the bowl out of the tray, and he started drinking the stew. Based on what he heard, he guessed that the stew is probably laced with some kind of poison. Regardless, since he already learned the Venom Dragon cultivation technique, the poison should have no effect on him. As he drank the stew, Lee was able to pick out the ingredients used: 100-year ginseng, mixed flowers, and a small amount of lunacy poison. There were even some purification tablets mixed in. Lee was delighted. This mix of herbs is an elixir that's so miraculous that consuming it once or twice would help one recover their energy and even increase it. However, overconsumption in large amounts, such as the quantity in the stew, would infect the brain with toxicity. Furthermore, as he expected, Namgung had also mixed a small amount of cinnabar in hopes that he wouldn't notice. Cinnabar is used in witchcraft. The spider was furious. He called Namgung a crazy person for giving the cult heir cinnabar poison. Lee shot a glance at the spider, telling him to shut up. Then he ordered the spider to spy on the lady and find out who the sorcerer that made the stew is. The spider quickly leaped out the half-open window, saying yes sir. Lee placed the bowl on the table. It seemed Namgung was trying to drive him crazy using the lunacy poison, and then used sorcery to turn him into a puppet. Lee wondered how skilled Namgung's sorcerer is for her to attempt something like this. He turned to Hyungsum, pointing out that he finished the stew and asking why he was still in his room. Hyungsum nervously told him that there is a martial master waiting for him outside, and that Namgung sent him. Lee looked on with a confused expression on his face. Sometime later, in the training grounds, Lee met with the martial master. The martial master, Tang Gon, introduced himself. Gon stretched the back of his neck and unenthusiastically said although it won't be for long, he hoped they would get along well. Lee recognized this person, the fierce wind warrior. Back when the Tempest Squad was fighting on the front lines, Gon was the largest contributor and he is one of the top 5 masters in the 9 Dragon Branch family. But from how he was acting, Lee confirmed the rumors of him being lazy to be true, but this made him wonder why he decided to be his master. Gon showed him 4 fingers, saying he was asked to train him for 4 days before the clan head visit. Lee concluded that Gon agreed to train him to get out of helping with festivity preparations. The lengths that Namgung was going to was starting to astound Lee. By having a master like Gon teach him martial arts, she creates the impression that she cares for her stepson, while all the while she is trying to use sorcery to control and shame him in front of the clan head. Lee had been wondering what she would do next, and it seemed like she had cooked up something that far exceeded his expectations. But sadly for her, he wasn't clueless. He asked Gon what he would be teaching him, and Gon said a martial art has already been picked out for him to learn. He asked Lee to watch closely as he wouldn't be doing it for a second time. Then he used a technique that allowed him to move in the shadows. Gon's movement created after images that surrounded Lee. Lee recognized this movement technique, and after his demonstration, Gon told him the name of the technique. The Shadow Shroud Step is a technique that allows one to move as if they were a shadow. Lee pointed out that this is a technique that Yu Cheng uses. Gon confirmed that it was. Lee thought to himself, pondering if Namgung was really planning to show off her son by comparing their progress. Gon continued on, explaining that with its covert movement, the Shadow Shroud Step is perfect to use with poison or hidden weapons. Furthermore, he pointed out the footsteps he left on the ground and he asked Lee to try and follow his footsteps. Lee was impressed. Gon was able to move like a shadow even when leaving clean footprints on the ground. It seems like Gon deserves the title of Fierce Wind Warrior. Now that he showed Lee how to do the Shadow Shroud Step, Gon wanted to leave. As he walked off, he told Lee to come to him if he wasn't sure about something. However, before he could leave, Lee told him that he learned the Shadow Shroud Step. This confused Gon. He thought Lee was bullshitting him. However, Lee repeated what he just said. Gon scratched his head, saying Lee probably doesn't understand how martial arts work because he has never learned martial arts before. He explained that the Shadow Shroud Step is a difficult technique that usually takes 10 days for a Tempest Squad member to just learn the forms. He proudly boasted that even a genius like him took 5 days, and to truly understand the meaning behind the form, he told Lee that usually takes 3 months. Lee was taken aback, and he pondered if Gon really just called himself a genius. He spoke saying, "Oh, so that's how long it normally takes." Gon turned around saying if Lee understood then he should keep practicing. But before he could finish his sentence, Lee interrupted saying he already learned it though. This frustrated Gon. He held his face trying to hide his expression, and he told Lee that this isn't something he can copy just by seeing it once. Since Gon was having a hard time believing him, Lee suggested they make a bet. He held up 3 fingers, wagering 30 silver coins on whether he actually learned the Shadow Shroud Step. This got Gon's attention. He turned around quickly, facing Lee and exclaiming, 30 silver. Lee chuckled, saying it seems that got his attention. From what he knows, Gon's monthly wage is around 10 coins, so he knew he could get his attention by betting 3 months worth of his wages. Gon cleared his throat, saying the Shadow Shroud Step is a priceless martial art, made in the spirit of the Tang clan, so he couldn't bet on such a thing. Lee teased him, asking if he was scared he would lose. This got under his skin, and Lee continued his act. He turned around saying if he knew the Fierce Wind Warrior was such a scaredy cat he wouldn't have suggested the bet. He questioned Gon's manhood, and said he would much rather train on his own than with a spineless coward. Gon couldn't hold back his anger anymore, so he called out to Lee asking him to wait. He praised him for his talents of getting under people's skin and agreed to the bet. Immediately after Gon agreed to the bet, Lee stopped acting. He turned around and reminded him that he couldn't back out of the bet. Gon said he knows, and he asked Lee to stop stalling and show him. After he said this, Lee disappeared, leaving a shadow after image behind, and he appeared behind him. Gon was left speechless. With a smile, Lee looked back and showed Gon a pouch. The pouch felt quite heavy, so he asked if he was planning on having some drinks today. Gon started sweating nervously. Not only was Lee able to use the technique, but he was proficient enough to steal his money pouch. Gon shouted this is a scam, and he accused Lee of already learning the Shadow Shroud Step. Lee pointed out that he never had an opportunity to learn martial arts before, to which Gon had no rebuttal, but it still didn't make any sense for someone who hasn't learned martial arts to learn the Shadow Shroud Step after seeing it just once. With a blissful grin, Lee asked Gon if he wanted to bet again since he didn't want to accept the results of the bet. He asked Gon if he had another martial art he could learn because the Shadow Shroud Step was boring. He teased him, saying he is probably too much of a genius, and he will probably learn every martial art Gon shows him after seeing it once. This infuriated Gon, and Lee added to the fire saying not only are Gon's pockets empty but it seems like he also lacks confidence. Gon snapped. He turned around, shouting you just wait here, I will be back with more money to bet. Lee couldn't contain himself. He turned his face away from Gon to hide his grin. As he walked away, Gon muttered, I know many more secret arts that are way harder to learn than the Shadow Shroud Step. He was determined to win the bet and make his money back. Lee looked on with a blissful expression. He understood why Gon was flustered. Not only did he, someone who has never learned martial arts, copy a martial art after only seeing it once, but he was able to steal from him, using the same technique without him noticing. Although he only recently started learning martial arts in this body, he learned martial arts in his previous life. The people he faced as the cult heir were all renowned masters, so for someone like him, it is easy to remember the form of most basic martial arts. Furthermore, he flaunted the pouch, saying no matter how talented the thief, stealing from someone who has learned martial arts is usually impossible. However, by having the ghost push the pouch a little, he was able to get it done easily. With a devious grin, he delighted in the idea of emptying the pockets of his new teacher. 4 hours later, Gon returned with multiple martial arts. First, he showed Lee the soul-chasing butterfly art, which Lee was able to do after just seeing it once. Next, he showed him the Tempest physical arts, and again Lee was able to use it after seeing it once. Finally, he showed him the Tempest dozen spins, and again Lee was able to use the technique after seeing it once. Frustrated by his money disappearing, Gon let out an anguished scream. The ghost of the elders looked on, enjoying the scene. Even though they considered Gon a heretic, they still felt bad for him, and seeing how he was suffering brought back memories of how they used to suffer under Lee as well. Lee blatantly displayed the money pouches he won from Gon. He asked him if he had any other martial arts. Feeling defeated, Gon dropped to his knees, saying he does, but he can't loan any more money from the bank. Lee thought that was unfortunate, and with a grin he suggested one final bet. Gon asked if Lee wasn't listening. He exclaimed with tears streaming down his face that he was broke. Lee told him that he is suggesting this because Gon is broke. He laid all the pouches on the ground, saying he is willing to put everything on the line. Gon nervously asked him if he was planning on selling him into slavery, and Lee assured him that he had no such plans. Gon has an important martial art that he wouldn't be able to copy easily, and that is the Tempest dance. Gon's eyes widened with shock, and his tone suddenly shifted. He released his inner energy, creating a gust of wind that almost blew Lee back. He told Lee that he is willing to bet with other martial arts, but Tempest dance is different. This martial art is the soul of the Tempest squad. So to use the Tempest dance in a bet is equivalent to disrespecting the Tempest squad that is the foundation of the 9 Dragon Division. Then he asked Lee to refrain from speaking of the Tempest dance. Lee was impressed. At first glance, Gon might seem lazy, but this display just showed how fierce he can be. With a drop of sweat dripping down his face, he nervously asked Gon if he lacked something to learn the Tempest dance. Gon stopped releasing his inner energy, saying Lee has every right to learn the Tempest dance as the son of the head of this family branch, and he explained that he already showed it to the first daughter and the third son, so showing it to Lee wouldn't be an issue. Lee told him that he wasn't talking about the bloodline requirement. He wanted to know if Gon thinks he is someone capable of learning the Tempest dance. Confused, Gon looked on, wondering what Lee meant. Suddenly Lee started shouting, calling Gon by the name Tempest Squad Fierce Wind Warrior. Then he patted his chest, asking if Gon thinks he is someone who has what it takes to become a Tempest, and if he has the right to continue the mission of the Tempest Squad. Lee's words sent a shiver down Gon's spine, and it caused him to recall a memory. One day, after a dreadful loss, their master gathered them, and to motivate them he gave a speech saying right now they were temporarily Zephyrs, but one day they shall become true Tempest once again. 20 years passed in a blink of an eye, and Lee's words have brought up emotions about the mission of the Tempest that had been buried in his heart. He didn't expect that Lee, the weakest out of the 3 heirs, would bring that kind of emotion out of him. However, he told Lee that while the mission of the Tempest caused his heart to quiver for a moment, he can't overlook the fact that Lee wants the Tempest dance to be used as a rewards for a bet. He doesn't believe that Lee's words are sincere. Lee started beating his chest, saying what a pain. He asked Gon if he would have taught him the Tempest dance 4 hours ago, before they made the bets, if he had asked. He pointed out that Gon was trying to run off after showing him the Shadow Shroud step once. Gon couldn't deny what Lee was accusing him of. He asked him if he taunted him to accept the bet so he could prove his worth. Lee confirmed that he was. Gon was impressed. Recently he has been hearing rumors that Lee changed, but it seems like Lee has been hiding his wits and power. The martial arts that he taught him are martial arts that are hard to perform with the level of internal energy he initially thought Lee possessed. 2 months is nowhere near enough time to build up sufficient internal energy, so Gon started suspecting that Lee has been building up his energy for ages, and has kept it hidden from Namgoon, and now that the Dark Supreme is visiting he decided to show his hidden claws. Lee nervously confirmed Gon's suspicions. Gon praised Lee for coming up with such a nefarious scheme to backstab his family, and he looked on with a proud expression on his face. Lee was taken aback. He understands that this is meant to be a compliment in the Tang clan, but it still felt weird to hear. The ghost spoke, saying it seems Gon has seen Lee's true worth. They couldn't help but marvel since Lee is the most skilled user of the yapping technique. Lee cursed the ghost and threatened to turn them into ghost pills if they kept talking. Afterwards he turned to Gon, asking if he was going to teach him the Tempest Dance. Gon went silent as he thought about it for a moment. The ghost chuckled, saying there is no point in resisting. Nobody can resist Lee's sweet words. The yapping technique is the reason Lee managed to get so many to pledge allegiance to him. Aggravated, Lee decided to turn the ghost into pills. He turned around, squeezing the life out of the ghost, and as they begged to be spared, Gon spoke. He had decided to teach Lee the Tempest Dance. Lee turned with a smile, then he brought his hands together and asked his master Gon for guidance. Gon smiled, he brought his hands together and accepted Lee's request. Gon explained that unlike the previous martial arts, the Tempest Dance will be quite difficult to learn, and he got into position preparing to use the footwork for the Tempest Dance. Lee suggested that they change the bet. The new bet will be whether he can learn the Tempest Dance by the end of the day, and the loser has to buy the winner a meal and drinks. Gon chuckled. He agreed to the bet, but he warned Lee that he truly believes that he will win this time. Then he asked Lee to watch closely as he demonstrated. Gon jumped in the air, and as he looked on, Lee narrates that the former Tempest Squad members promised not to interfere in the matters concerning the inheritance of the head of the family. Therefore, even if he continues learning the Tempest Dance, Gon wouldn't be able to support him, but it will send a message that Lee is a new Tempest who they can share drinks with. The panel pans out, and Gon's Tempest Dance starts creating tornadoes. Sometime later, inside a restaurant, we see Gon with all the color faded from his body. He didn't mind losing the bet, since if Lee gets stronger it will be better for all of them. However, he turned his attention to the stack of empty plates and bowls, angry about the fact that Lee isn't even sharing anything with him. He looked on as Lee continued to devour the food, thinking to himself how this can be considered a meal. The owner of the restaurant came over, asking if Gon needed anything else. Gon couldn't bear watching all his money disappear while sober, so he asked the restaurant owner to bring him a bottle of alcohol. The restaurant owner left, and Lee commented that Gon is quite the drinker. He asked if they should have gone to the Dragon Tower instead. Gon shouted, asking if Lee doesn't know how expensive that place is. He told Lee that this restaurant is quite high-end as well, and while the Dragon Tower is better, this place is the most popular place around here. The owner returned with the alcohol, and Gon grabbed it immediately and he started chugging it. He was more than willing to pick up the tab even if it was a little expensive, but who would have thought that Lee would use up a week's worth of his food budget? Lee was glad that they didn't go to the Dragon Tower. For his plan to work, he needed a popular place like this one. He reached his hand underneath the table. For the past 2 months he had to hold himself back because of the ban Nemgung put on him, but he can't delay any further. He left a mark underneath the table using his internal energy. The ghost recognized its seal, and they asked Lee if he came to this place to leave the mark. Lee explained that he needs to let those who are still in despair know that he is still alive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then watch another one. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.